Uh, Dear students, very good morning. Today we will continue learning about the mass spectrometry general principles and theory. Today, I think this is the point where we have stopped our previous class, and I discussed in the previous class couple of ionization techniques, where I have explained the electron impact ionization technique and chemical ionization technique, and also fab technique, Marley technique, and ESI technique, and so on. And any spectrometer will consists of three components. One is the ionization. So the ionization is done by the ionizer, and we have learned the few ionizers. Then the next component is the ion separation is the next general principle that is a part of the mass spectrometry. And the separation, the ionizer form the ions, and then these ions are to be separated based on some criteria. So that is the job of the ion analyzer. In a short form, analyzer we can say. Okay, so the analyzer analyzes the fragmented ions which are formed in the previous chamber, that is the ionizer, and then it separates. That is the job of the ionizer. How it is separated? So there are several principles to separate and segregate the fragmented ion based on some criteria. So one of the oldest criteria, which was in fact used by J.J. Thomson and also Aston, is the single focusing mass spectrometer, which consists of a magnetic field, and the separation takes place in the presence of a static magnetic field. So uh, that is the principle in the older days, by which in fact that was the starting point, by then starting point of the mass spectrometer. And then later on, several modifications, additions, and revolutionary technological components have been introduced and incorporated in the mass spectrometry, so that we can get better resolution and better sensitivity, so that uh, the analyst will be beneficial out of the after using the spectrometer. Then let us focus. I think very briefly, I'm just going to give a general idea how this is going to be done. And in the mass single focusing ion analyzer, we use a magnetic field. Okay, and the previously what has happened, the ionizer has actually uh, formed the fragmented ion of the sample or the molecule which we are interested in. Then these things are then just after the ionizer, we will have a small arrangement, what we call it as a accelerating lenses. In this diagram, it is already shown here. So these are the accelerating lenses, and this is the ion source. Okay, once the ions are formed, these are basically accelerated with some kinetic energy from the ion source, and then they will be passing by this way. And this is where the one of the arrangement to separate the ions is that you just keep a magnetic field. You just apply magnetic field just after the ion source, then the separation will take place. And this is a general principle explained here. Then since the ions, fragmented ions, are basically accelerated with some kind of kinetic energy, that kinetic energy actually we can uh, draw a simple equation for the kinetic energy of the accelerated fragmented ions, which is nothing but the half mv square is equal to Ze capital V, where capital V is the voltage, acceleration voltage that we applied between the acceleration lenses. Okay, and Z is the charge, E is the fundamental charge, and the m is the mass of the fragmented ion that we are interested in, and also v is the velocity, so velocity of the fragmented ion, which is basically traveling. Okay, so this its kinetic energy is equivalent to that of ZA capital V. Now, as we know from a simple magnetic field theory or electromagnetism, that any charged species, any charged particle that is encountering a magnetic field or electric field, the path basically deviates from the original path, and then in fact, they take a circular path, right? So that is the principle in which basically is involved in this single focusing mass spectrometers. So you can see here that a beam of ions are coming out, and then as you can see that the moment they encounter the magnetic field, then their path will be different. That actually depends upon the m by z of the the mass to charge ratio of the fragmented ion. Okay, so this is the principle that generally we use it. Of course, there is a little bit of a small equation that one can always derive. To take the circular path, for any particle, to travel in a circular path, that we know that simple physics law, that it's a centrifugal force and then centripetal force, both are to be basically matching, both are to be equal. Only then a particular charges particle will be particularly staying in a particular radius, and then it will be traveling in that particular path, right? So this is the centrifugal and then centripetal force must be equal to each other. So from this equation that we can derive a simple equation that the radius of the ions, fragmented ions, depends upon this factor, that is the mv divided by the ZeB. mv is the momentum. mv is the momentum. So what is r? R is the radius of the fragmented ion that actually it takes. Okay, so the radius depends upon the momentum. It makes really sense, right? Because particular ions will have a particular mass and particular charge, right? That means they will have a unique momentum. Therefore, each fragmented ion will take a different circular path. That's what this equation says. As you can see here, the radius r depends upon the momentum, and momentum depends upon the size of the fragmented ion. If the size is bigger, then its momentum. Of course, if m and v both are higher, then such a particle will have this thing, right? But you remember that V is actually more or less same for all the fragment ions, because that we already accelerated with the same kinetic energy using the acceleration lenses. Therefore, m is something that it determines the circular path. Right? Overall, basically, the momentum is a unique factor of a fragmented ion. Accordingly, the circular path will be changing. Okay, and then accordingly, you can keep the detector and then detect it. So that's how this operation basically takes place. And you can keep on writing. You can continue in deriving a small equation for m by z value, and in the previous expression, that from here, this is equation number 1, and then equation number 2. From equation number 2, we can derive this radius, and then this depends upon this one. Using these 3 equations, we can further go on then deriving a small expression for the m by z value, and what are the factors that influence the m by z value. And the m by z value depends upon these factors, that E capital V square R square by 2V. And for a unique unique fragmented ion at a given potential, it actually depends upon. So at a given at a constant magnetic field, it actually depends upon the voltage that is basically applied. Okay, and then suppose if you keep both B and V constant, okay, R is something that changes as per the m by z value, right? That is what exactly is done the spectrometer, that the static magnetic field and then accelerating voltage both are kept constant, so that for at a given instant a particular m by z value fragmented ion will come out and then reach the detector. And the detector is something that initially, as you can see here, it is kept here. Suppose if you move the detector towards this direction, then you can even, if you move here and then you keep the slit over here, then it can detect even this one, because this radius is somewhat smaller and this radius this radius, the outer this one arc radius is much higher, right? So, center is somewhere here. I'm just giving a hypothetical one. So this radius is a small, is a higher, and this one is a smaller, right? Okay, so in the scanning, what the people does is that they just move the detector from one place to the other place, so as to record all the fragmented ion, right? So that is the general principle of the single focusing analyzer. And the single focusing ionizer uses the magnetic field, and the magnetic field actually deflects the original path of the fragmented ion motion, and then they take a circular path, right? And the m by z value actually depends upon these factors, and then unique a unique fragmented ion will take a unique under a constant static magnetic field and then applied voltages, then it takes a unique path. Okay, so that is the principle using to separate that. That means if you have a n number of unique fragmented ions, all those things actually take the same circular path as long as you keep the static magnetic field and then acceleration voltage same. Okay, so that is the principle. Now the problem, it is good, the simple arrangement, you don't have much components, simply you have a acceleration lenses and then you have the magnetic field, and then that detection anyway it will be there. So the arrangement is simple, and then the simple concept, as a result that this particular uh, arrangement will always keep the cost of the equipment always within our conditions, and then it is affordable. However, if you look at the other technicalities, that these single focusing ionizers actually doesn't give much resolution. They give only the unit masses. They can't give the fractions. Okay, but we know that very well. The fractions are something that up to two digits or three digits, if it can give the molecular mass, then that is something that we can interpret, and from there we can derive the molecular formula. But however, they don't give. Okay, so these single focusing analyzers, they give only the whole numbers. Okay, nearest numbers it will give. Okay, that is one problem. The other problem is that we have assumed the all the ions actually are having the same kinetic energy. All the accelerated ions that are just that are produced from the ion source are having the same kinetic energy. So this is the assumption that we have started. Okay, but in principle actually that is not true, because there is something called a spatial distribution. That means initial ones will have a little bit of more kinetic energy than the older one. So therefore, a range of even though molecule, even though you are considering the same fragmented ion, let's say which is actually 31 or 30 fragmented ion we have in the molecule, let's say 30 molecular fragmented ion, and this we will not have only one, but then there are several 30 fragmented ions are there. Okay, 30 number fragmented ions are there. So all those things will not have the same kinetic energy. They will have a different kinetic energy. But we have started discussing that it will have same kinetic energy because we are applying the same accelerated potential. That is true. That is true in theory, but then in practical, it is not true. So if you have a same fragmented ions and these do not possess the same kinetic energy, instead they will have a plus or minus kind of thing, delta. There will be some kind of a distribution around that particular kinetic energy, right? So that is a practical difficulty of the single focusing analyzer. Therefore, people started looking for alternatives, and they come up with a small solution. That solution is the double focusing ion analyzer. In this ionizer, as the name suggests, that we will have a two focusing systems are there. Double means two, so two focusing system will be there just before the magnetic. This is the magnetic analyzer. Just before that, we will have a radial electrostatic magnetic field is applied, which is having the this is called the radial electrostatic magnetic field arrangement. Okay, so this is where your ion source is there. So just after the ion source, we will have a radial electrostatic magnetic field, for which you have a curved electric plates are kept in, and then through which that the radial electrostatic field is basically applied. Okay, so and after that it will have a, and after that and before the detector, we will have the magnetic analyzer, like in the previous case, the single focusing ion analyzer. The advantage with this is that, you know, it basically you can again do some small math, and then it is possible to prove a simple equation like this. Okay, this is the electrostatic field. Okay, this electrostatic field that is coming out, right? So just after the ions, so you have the lenses, and then there is electrostatic field. This electrostatic field, when it is equal to the centripetal force, then basically they come out, and then they travel in a circular path. Okay, when this is true, then they take a circular path, and the circular path equation can be written, and then this is nothing but the R is equal to capital V by E. That means capital V is, please remember, that is the applied voltage. Okay, an applied voltage of the acceleration, for acceleration, and E is the radial field strength that we have applied through the curved electrostatic plates. Okay, that means, as you can see here, that the radius of a particular fragment array which is taking, it doesn't depend upon the either mass or the velocity or the momentum, like in the case of a single focusing analyzer. That is really good, because it will basically not create any kind of a spatial distribution, which was actually the problem of the single focusing ion analyzer. So that will be get rid of this, because R doesn't depend upon the momentum of the ions. Okay, it only depends upon the applied voltages and the electrostatic potentials. Okay, so unique fragmented ions will take a unique radial path, and then under special conditions, like for a unique V and then E value. So that is the advantage of this, and then by using this, that the sensitivity of the instrument and then also resolution both were improved a lot, and using this, even the resolutions are more than 5,000 for the first time, or 10,000, up to 1 lakh also can be achieved by using not mere one or two magnetic ionizers, but then it will be, if you are using more than two instead of using a single one. Here that we have used only one electrostatic field, one magnetic field, but there are arrangements where you can have the more than two. Maybe two electrostatic field will be there, one magnetic, or one magnetic will be there with two other things. So that depends upon the arrangement and requirement. So people have played around all the configurations to improve. Okay, so to improve the resolution, people have played with different configurations, where people have used more than one static electrostatic field, and also more than one magnetic field in the ion analyzer chamber. Okay, and this is a great subject, and I think I will not go through the further details, but you just remember that by using the double focusing ionizers, that it is fairly easy to improve the ion the resolution, and to get the fraction, the molecular mass of the sample up to fractions. Okay, whereas the single focusing doesn't give the fractions. It only gives the up to whole number, nearest whole number that it will give. Okay. Another component here is the quadrupole mass analyzer. So quadrupole, as the name suggests, the quadrupole ionizers will have a 4 poles, as you can see on the right hand side. This is the quadrupole. This is the quadrupole ionizer arrangement. Okay, in this arrangement you have 4 poles are there, basically the cylindrical rods, and these two and these two, okay, will have uh, a potential, and also just a minute. Okay, so these two and these two, okay, this one and this one will have a unique uh, static uh, electric field, and a combination of, basically a combination of static voltage and also the radio frequency pulse are applied across these two. Similarly, between these 2 poles, okay, voltage, a set of a voltage, a combination of voltage plus the radio frequency is applied. Okay, okay, so that is the basic principle involved in the quadrupole. So this, when you apply these things for a unique values of voltage and RF frequency that we are applying between the opposite charge, opposite poles, a particular a particular fragmented ion will pass through, but not the others. Okay, I repeat, basically here what we use, there is something called voltage plus there is a combination of RF frequency, radio frequency. Okay, so between these 2 poles, let's say this is a positively, so we will apply a positive voltage between these two opposite one, and then a unique frequency, a radio frequency pulse that we will apply. Similarly, we will apply the same thing. Okay, this is a negative, sorry, this is negative, and then same frequency that we will apply. Okay, so this is a 2 different signs, so the same strength but then different signs. The voltage plus a radio frequency pulse are applied between the opposite poles. So when you apply this kind of voltage plus the radio frequency pulse, now let's say you can see here there is an animated diagram here. So you have so many, when they are entering, this is the source, that from the source we have several fragmented ions are coming, which are depicted with different different colors. So for a unique combination, that one particular fragmented ions will just pass through without without colliding with the cylindrical poles, whereas the other ones actually they do not, they collide with this thing, they don't reach the detector. Okay, that is the principle. And by changing these potentials, the applied voltage and the radio frequencies, one can allow the another one also, but basically another combination at later times. Basically one can do it systematically, one can scan from one by applying different combinations of voltage and the radio frequency pulse along the opposite charged cylinders. One can allow one type of ions to pass through at a given time, whereas the other one will collide. So you can see here that there are different ions are coming in the animated diagram. Only the pink ones are actually going. But suppose if you change the values of the voltage and the other one, then basically the others maybe will reach. Okay, so that is a general principle in the quadrupole ionizer. Okay, I think fine details about this one are not important. Maybe probably if you take the instrumentation methods of analysis, I can just explain these things maybe as a part of the elective course. Then another ion analyzer which is well studied and well used, widely used, is the time of flight. Time of flight is very interesting and very simple concept to understand the principle of this time of flight mass analyzer. the separation takes place in a hollow tube. Okay, the separation of the fragmented ions in the ion chambers are just allowed to enter into the hollow tube, a lengthy hollow tube, and then the separation just takes place over there, just based on the inherent property. What is the inherent property? As we know that the accelerating lenses are this direction, and then they have accelerated and they just enter into the hollow tube. And in the fragmented ions, we have set of fragmented ions, and they are basically having different masses. Different masses are there. For example, I showed here with a small tiny dot, and then little medium dot, and then little bigger dot. So each indicates the size. This is a higher size, this is a lower size. And as we know that the bulkier fragmented ion cannot travel fast, their velocity is slow, and then they reach the detector much later times. This is what exactly is shown in this diagram, that the lighter ones are the ones actually immediately, with no time they reach it. And then whereas the followed by the medium one, and followed by the heavier fragmented ion, right? It is very fairly easy that if you are very lean, it is we can expect that you can run fast, right? If you are bulkier, then you can't run really fast, right? That's the principle. And then the separation just takes place based on the inherent property of the fragmented ion. So time of flight. So the detector actually, this analyzer just measure what is the point of time at which these ions are just entering into the analyzer, and what is the time that the detector is detected. So the time that is taken for an ion to reach the detector will be measured. That is why it is said to be time of flight. In the flight tube, that the fragmented ions are just freely moving, and then they are reaching one by one just based on their inherent property. Lighter ones are actually having the more velocity, and they reach quickly as compared to the heavier fragmented ions. That is the principle, and little bit of mathematics about this. And again I say that this is I can explain more details maybe in the as a part of the instrumentation methods of analysis selective. And then that's all about the general overview of the mass analyzers. And then just after the mass analyzer, we will have a detector, and the detectors are usually the electron multipliers. The detectors are usually the electron multipliers. I am sure that you know what is the photomultiplier. Photomultiplier is a device that basically multiplies the photons which are received, and then accordingly it generates the electrons. Okay, after receiving a photon, then based on the photoelectric effect, the electrons will be generated, and these generated electrons basically will be multiplied using the electric components. That is a photomultiplier. Likewise, here we have an electron multiplier. Okay, there are certain devices, what we call as diodes. They will have a copper and beryllium surface. Suppose if these positively charged fragmented ions are basically hitting, when they are hitting the surfaces, they produce electrons, and these electrons will be captured by the diodes, and then they multiply to several fold. Why it is required? Because we can't detect the current for fewer electrons. If you are having larger number of electrons and then current is more, then detection is fairly easy. And if you have only one or two electrons, then it is our detection and then appropriate correlation between the structure fragmented ion and the structure is not possible, because they produce very weak signal. Okay, we need more current. If you want more current, then whatever it is produced, then accordingly it should be multiplying. Then the electric components basically they multiply things, and then signal will be much better to read. Okay, so that is the principle involved in this any of the detector that we come across as a part of the mass spectrometer. Usually the electron multipliers, Faraday cup. Okay, Faraday cup is one arrangement to use as a detector. Right, I think rest of the things, in recent days that most of the arrangements are actually coming with the ICR, that is the ion cyclotron resonance. Just as the nuclear magnetic resonance, this is the ion cyclotron resonance, where the ions will be resonating with a particular frequency within a closed shell, the cube or maybe rectangle box kind of arrangement. And by applying different voltages and entrance and exit potentials, we can take out. Okay, so these are basically kind of trapped initially. The ions for the same kind, they enter into a trap, and then they basically circulate in a circular path. Okay, and within the trap, later on, if you apply a frequency which is actually a voltage and frequency which is exactly matching with the this frequency, this frequency of the ions which are circulating within that, then they will exit. Okay, that is the principle of the ion cyclotron resonance, and a little bit of mathematics. And then this is coupled with the Fourier transform, ICR coupled with the Fourier transform, found to be very good mass spectrometer arrangement for separation of the ions. Okay, so with that, that is a general overview of the mass spectrometer, how they are working. And then I just very briefly I just mentioned, and you need not to worry about the technicality, but one should have a general idea what it is exactly. That's why I have spent little time in explaining. You can read what is the single focusing ion analyzer, what is the basic principle. Suppose if I ask you, if the examiner is asking you to explain for a 2 marks question, you should be able to write the principle. What is the time of flight? What is the single focusing ion analyzer? What is the principle? Or double focusing? So that try to read it. Okay. So with this, technicalities are over. Now we will just go to the actual content of the mass spectrometry. I think this is not required. This I already covered. Probably I will skip these things. I think, yeah, this is where I just want to explain. Yeah, the fragmentation. So hereafter we discuss about the mass spectrometry and fragmentation rules. So we have learned several ionization techniques. Okay, and the ionization technique for MSc General Lab is generally it is a for MSc course is generally it is a EI or CI, electron ionization impactor, or the chemical ionization. Mass spectrum will be provided to you to analyze the data. Okay, but mostly it is a EI mass spectrum people will be giving mostly. But sometimes the chemical ionization mass spectrum can also be given to interpret the data. Okay, please remember that. So whatever we are going to discuss is the EI mass spectrum, and that is one thing. And the mass spectrometers are named, please remember this, mass spectrometers are named based on the ion source as well as the mass analyzer. Yesterday class also I have explained this. Okay, and what exactly happening in the EI mass spectrometer? EI ionizer. Okay, when a molecule is bombarded, the gas phase molecules are basically bombarded with the electron beam, which is having the 70 electron volts. And this is a huge amount of energy, and this huge amount of energy not only breaks the bond, basically knocks out one particular electron from the neutral molecule, but it also ruptures the bonds, and then as a result the further fragmentation actually takes place. Okay, that's what happens, because the amount which is given, the kinetic energy will be translated to the bonds, and then as a result the bonds will be ruptured and they will break into fragments. So that is something that one should remember. And then radical, our molecular ion, neutral radical cation, we say it is an odd electron species. Okay, because we knocked out molecule is having the even electrons, whereas the after knocking out one electron, it will be certainly an odd electron species. Okay, please remember that. and the radicals in the mass spectrometer cannot be detected. Similarly, neutral species cannot be detected. Okay, neutral species cannot be detected. Mass spectrometer only detects the positively charged species or fragments. Okay, please remember that. Okay, so just to give you how the fragmentation takes place, I have just taken methanol as an example. You can see here that the methanol taking one electron and then it is forming the molecular ion, right? Molecular ion, and this molecular ion actually losing one hydrogen electron, hydrogen radical, and then it is forming CH2OH. CH2OH, which is close to, which is 31 weight, which is having, this species is having 31 weight. Then suppose it can go the other way also, that this CH3 can lose as a cation, OH radical can be eliminated. So this is another possibility. So anything is possible in the mass spectrometry, right? And as I mentioned that it will not detect the hydrogens, or it will not detect the hydroxyl radical, but it only detects this one as well as this one. But how do you infer radicals and then the neutral species? Okay, from the peaks we can infer whether a neutral species is eliminated or not, that we can infer. Okay, just suppose you have a molecular mass, for example this one. What is the molecular mass of this one? This is 17 plus 15, it is a 32. 32 is the molecular mass. And then if it is losing one hydrogen radical, then there must be a peak at m minus 1 peak. Okay, so there must be an m minus 1 peak. Suppose if you see a peak at 31, then it means that there is, it lost one hydrogen radical. So hydrogen radical it doesn't show. Suppose in the same spectrum, if you see at the position at the peak at 1, it doesn't show. Okay, this will not be seen. This peak correspond to this will not be shown. And then similarly, peak correspond to this cannot be seen. But a peak correspond to this will be seen. 15 can be seen. Okay, so in this spectrum that you can have a peak at 32, and then this is 31, and this is 15. So 3 peaks will be seen in this mass spectrum of the methanol. Okay, now there is a huge amount of literature, and especially the people to understand the fragmentation pattern of organic molecules, so as to understand and interpret the molecular structure. Okay, and people like McLafate and then Bannon, Stenhagen, and then Meyerson, these are the people basically developed a lot of general principle, and they studied basically a series of compounds of same kind, alkanes, alkenes, etc. And then finally they came up with some kind of general observations which we are studying. And these are not rules, I would say, but these are some kind of guidelines which will help us to interpret the molecular structure. Okay, so let us go to those fragmentation rules. But before that, let me tell you some general conventions and as well as the few general aspects. So when we are writing about molecular ion, we should follow this type of condition. Suppose if you are writing in a normal case, then you need not to be very specific. But if you are trying to understand what are the fragments that are formed when you're trying to analyze the mass spectrum, then this is something that we should follow. Instead of writing, this type of notation, it is always better that you localize the radical and then cation in the molecular ion. That is always better. Okay, like you can follow the rules of Lewis structures. So Lewis structures, when we are writing that 8 electrons is something that we follow. Likewise here also, you localize the radical and then also the cation on the bonds or the atoms, and then accordingly you proceed. That is one principle that one should remember. Another thing is that when you're writing the molecular ion, now where it should be written, where I should keep the molecular ion. You might have noticed in the previous example, methanol, the molecular cation is shown on the heteroatom, isn't it? The molecular atom is a molecular ion. The radical cation is shown on the oxygen atom. That is the one convention. So whenever you see a pi bond or the heteroatom, okay, heteroatom will have a lone pair of electrons, so you can that is much easier to knock out the electrons. Similarly, the pi bond electrons are much easier to knock out, and then followed by the pi bond, therefore sigma bond. Therefore, it is always better that when you come across heteroatom then pi bond, so one has to show the radical cation on those bonds and those places instead of showing on the sigma bond. That is one thing. Okay, and the bond breaking can be shown in two ways. One is the homolytic cleavage and heterolytic cleavage. Homolytic cleavage means there is only one only one electron is shifted. That means the half hook notation. And if you are showing the double hook, double arrow, full arrow, then the two electrons are moving, right? So you can follow this notation or that notation based on your situation. Okay, if you are using the half hook notation, then that means only one electron will be moved. If you are using a complete hook, a full hook, complete this thing, then we say it is a two electrons are moving. Okay, then these are the examples of ionization. We have some kind of ether, and this ether moiety is subjected to the electron ionization, and as a result, since it is having the heteroatom oxygen, then the radical cation is shown on the oxygen atom, right? It will form a nice molecular ion. Then later on, this radical can be shifted here. Okay, on the other hand, this bonding electrons can move. One of the bonding electron can move over here, and this methyl radical basically can eliminate as a radical. That is one possibility. Okay, so this is the example for showing the homolytic cleavage. Okay, and another example is shown here, the heterolytic cleavage, where the two electrons are shown here. And then we just see here. Okay, here you can see that the heteroatom is a bromide. This is the ethyl bromide. Then the molecular ion is shown on the bromide, and the bromide actually can take two electrons, and then it can eliminate as a radical, leaving this one as a, it has taken two, right? You can see here the two electrons. Here is a complete arrow, full arrow is shown here. The two electrons it takes, and then bromide radical may be liberated, and then it will leave out the cation. So this is an example of heterolytic cleavage. So you can follow either homolytic or heterolytic cleavage for breaking the bonds and trying to understand the fragmentation concept. And whatever we see, as I said, that these are the positively charged. Whatever I just mentioned, like the mass spectrometer detects only the positively charged species, right? It's not the radicals, or it's not the other things, right? Therefore, you can always apply, or you can always infer that the fragmented peaks are the fragments that is having the even number of electrons. Okay, so you can always infer that because it only detecting the positively charged. Therefore, positive means that there are two electrons are knocked out, except the molecular ion. There is a exception. The molecular always will have a odd number of electrons because only one electron is knocked out. Therefore, it will be definitely always odd electron species. Molecular ion is always odd electron species, except that one. Most of the things whatever you see in the mass spectrum, generally they are the even electron fragments. Okay, and the probability of cleaving a given bond is related to the bond strength. Okay, and the stability of the fragment that are formed. Okay, so how whether a particular bond is cleaving or not, or breaking or not, that all depends upon the first thing is the the stability of that bond, whether it is a single bond, double bond, or triple bond. That's the one. And within the single bond also, how stable it is, or within double bond also, how stable it is. So these are the factors that really determine. Similarly, suppose if the fragmented ions are less stable than the previous precursor, then naturally this will not undergo to the fragmentation. It will rather be very happy to stay in the same position, right? That is one thing we should write it. Okay. And sometimes these cations which are formed, they will rearrange and they will form some kind of stable cations. Okay. So if that is feasible, and if that is really giving more stability, definitely they do undergo some kind of rearrangements. So we will see that McLafferty rearrangement is one that we will be discussing as a part of the fragmentation rules. That we will see that later. Okay. So breaking ring is a bit difficult. Breaking a ring is a bit difficult, but because to break a ring that you need to break two bonds, so that is a bit difficult task. But they do break it, but the fragmentation of the rings will be less. Okay, of course the ring is having a highly strained ring, then definitely it will break. But then especially when you're talking about the aromatic ring, the breaking is less. Okay. And apart from this general principle, we have some 10 general rules are there. So those things I will come to that after the discussion of some general aspect. These are some of the general aspect of mass spectrum I'm going to discuss initially. Later on, I will go to the general principles that will be helpful in understand the mass spectrum and to solve the problems. And later on, we will discuss about the general fragmentation patterns of alkanes, ethers, ethynes. So these things that we will discuss in the third step. Okay, so this is how I'm going to present. So now I will just explain some general features of mass spectrum. What we come across. Okay, and this point I already mentioned that a mass spectrum is a plot of m by z value versus the relative abundance of the fragments. Okay, that includes the molecular ion as well as the fragments. Okay, and now the peak which is having 100% relative abundance, what we call it as a base peak. Okay, and in this particular spectrum, it is at 43 we have a base peak. Okay, but you can see here there is at 114 that there is a peak. This generally is the molecular mass of the compound. Okay, so molecular mass, the peak which you see on the extreme right hand side is most likely it is your molecular thing. Most likely, why I said most likely means that there are these molecular ions will be sometimes associated with isotopic peaks. That concept we will discuss later. But most likely the one which you see extreme end, except the isotope peaks, is going to be your molecular ion peak. That means that is the quantity that you can immediately take and then interpret into the data, interpret to the molecular structure. Okay, so this concept already we discussed, and then this is also we discussed that it detects the positively charged species but not the other one. Okay, neutral species not recorded, and also radicals are not recorded. So this point already covered, so I'm just skipping this point. Okay, so this is where that this is what I was talking about, the isotope peak. So the M plus peak, the molecular ion peak, usually observed on the right hand side, and then it will be always associated with some kind of other peaks. Okay, what are those? Those peaks are typically M plus 1 peak, M plus 2 peaks. Okay, and sometimes M plus 4, M plus 6 peaks also will be there. Suppose if you stick to the statement of extreme right one is molecular thing, that might be sometimes your M+6 peak. So you can't really interpret that M+6 peak as your molecular peak. I will come to that point. Don't worry about it. Just I'm saying that it can't be always the extreme right one in the spectrum can be your molecular weight of the compound. Okay, there is a clause on that. Okay, but certainly you can say that extreme right side, if you see a catastrophe peak, okay, and then that will be one of the peak will be your molecular mass, and then that you have to identify what exactly is your thing. Okay, so that is the point. Now before going to that part, we know the relative abundance concept, and I'm sure that and I don't need to give a further explanation on the relative abundance concept. The carbon, if you take the carbon as an example, that the out of 100 atoms, almost 99 atoms are, you have the carbon 12, and then carbon 13, one carbon atom is the remaining one carbon atom is the having the molecular mass of atomic mass of the 13. Okay, so please remember that. Okay, so this is important. Similarly, the hydrogen, similarly chlorine, nitrogen, so they do have the relative abundance. So M+1 peak is basically mainly contributed from the couple of atoms like the carbon and also hydrogens. Because the carbons and hydrogens actually contribute to the M+1 peak that we will discuss. Just a minute, I think my slides are basically shifted. Anyway, I think. Okay, so maybe I think I will come to that point later, but let me confine my discussion to the molecular ion peak. The molecular ion peak we are discussing that the extreme right, if you come across as cluster of peaks, so one of the peak can be your molecular mass of your compound. Okay, that's the point. You can stick it that the cluster, remaining cluster that we will discuss maybe after discussing a few more points. The highest mass, the peak must correspond to the highest mass in the spectrum, excluding isotope. It can be your molecular peak. And then the ion must have an odd number of electrons, usually radical cation. Okay, so the ion, whatever you're thinking, it should have an odd number of electrons. And then the this ion, when you look at the to judge whether particular ion is your particular ion is said to be the molecular ion or something else, then it can be understood from some general features like the molecular ion usually it loses some of the neutral species and radicals. Okay, some of the neutral species and radicals. So just I given the example of methanol. In the case of methanol, at 32 is the molecular mass. At molecular mass at 32, you will see a peak. Then it will also give M-1 peak. Okay, just one unit less than that, you will see another one. Okay, at M-17 basically correspond to the hydroxyl radical. Hydroxyl radical, if it lose, what is the difference? The difference is 15. So at 15, you will see another intense peak, right? So these are the symptoms or the symbolics of identifying the molecular ion. Okay, this is very important that while interpreting the data, one should not simply jump into the conclusion that extreme right side peak is your thing. Okay, that is the point. I'm trying to convey the message. And another thing is that you can always apply to identify whether a particular peak is your molecular ion peak or a fragmented ion peak. To know that, you can always apply some of these features. This is one feature that I have explained. Okay, so the molecular ion will be associated with a cluster of peaks, the isotope peaks. Okay, and that is one thing. Second thing is that it will lose some kind of neutral species and radicals, well-known neutral species and radicals. For example, water. Okay, water is a 16 plus 18 peak is very common. Okay, a particular peak is said to be molecular ion, suppose if it is losing a neutral species of 8 in water, then there is a possibility that it can be your molecular peak. So that is the point I'm trying to convey. Similarly, you can always apply a rule, what we call it as a nitrogen rule. That nitrogen rule you can apply to say a particular molecular peak is your molecular ion or not. How this what is nitrogen rule? First of all, nitrogen rule says that if a molecule is having even number of odd number of nitrogens. Suppose you have a molecule and this molecule is having a odd number of nitrogens, then its molecular mass will be odd number. Suppose if you see a even number, or if there are no nitrogens, okay, then in that case you will see even molecular mass. Okay, so odd molecular mass and even molecular mass are basically related to the nitrogens, number of nitrogen present in that. Suppose if your molecule is having the odd number of nitrogens, so definitely the molecular mass of your compound will be odd number. Suppose if a molecule doesn't have any have the even number of nitrogens, or it doesn't have anything, that usually it will show at an even number of molecular mass, the molecular peak will be shown. So this is a kind of very interesting thing that we can apply. Suppose you have done a reaction with some nitrogen you have done, and you are trying to understand from the mass spectrometry that whether nitration happens or not. Then you give the compound for the mass analysis, and you know that you are expecting a nitrogen because you did the nitrogen reaction in the laboratory. That means you are expecting nitrogen. Suppose if nitration happens, then there should be one nitrogen, right? If there is a nitrogen, that molecular ion should be seen at the odd number, not at the even number. So this is a very nice, interesting rule that will be helpful for us to determine a particular peak is a molecular ion or something else. Okay. And similarly, you can apply this rule is basically applicable. Nitrogen rule is applicable for the all organic compounds which contains nitrogen, carbon, etc., but not the inorganic compounds. Inorganic compound, if you try to apply this nitrogen rule, it doesn't satisfy. Okay, you can verify this statement. But organic compounds, for example, nitromethane is there. What is the molecular mass of nitromethane? Can anybody tell what is the molecular mass of nitromethane? Quickly. How many nitrogens are there? One nitrogen. One nitrogen is 14. 14 plus methyl. Methyl means 15. 14 plus 15 plus 29. 29 plus 32. How much it is? 61?
61.0.
Yeah. So 61 is the molecular mass of this one. Is it an odd number or even number? Definitely it is odd number. Then you just take some other example like 1,2-dinitroethane. 1,2-dinitroethane, and just calculate and see what is the molecular mass. Is it even or odd? You have four oxygens. 4 oxygen means 64. Not 48, so 64. 64 plus 2 nitrogens, 28. 64 plus 28 plus 14, 14, 28. 28, 28, 52. 52 plus 64. How much? It's a definitely even number, right? Oh my God, everybody is calculating. Okay, fine. It's very easy that CH2 means 14. 14 plus 14, 28. 28, right? And 2 nitrogens are there, 28. 28 plus 28, 56, right? Yeah, 56. 56 plus 64. 64 came from the 4 oxygens. So definitely it is a even number, right? So even number is the indicates that there are 2 nitrogens. We know that we started with the 2 nitrogens. Therefore, it is having the molecular weight is said to be, it is a even number. So that is a peculiarity of the nitrogen atom. Actually, this rule actually came from nitrogen peculiarity, and you can see in the entire whole periodic table, it is only one element with the peculiarity. What is the peculiarity? The peculiarity is this, that what is the atomic mass of the nitrogen? Atomic mass is 14, but what atomic number is? Atomic number is 7. It is odd number. So that is a peculiar thing, that and then it is having how many bonds it can form? Hello? How many bonds it can form? It is 3 bonds. Trivalent, right? So usually it is a trivalent. So that is a peculiarity. So nitrogen, with an exception, it is an exception where it will have the usually if the atomic weight is even number, it actually sorry, if atomic number is the even number, then usually it will have a even number of coordination, but only and then odd number coordination actually is differing in the case of nitrogen atom. That is why that we see this type of special behavior. Okay. Now, if you can proceed further to identify, I'm just trying to understand, trying to explain what are the general rules that can apply to find out whether a particular peak is molecular ion peak or not. So nitrogen rule is one thing. Another thing is that the isotope that we have discussed. The other thing is that the rule of 13 that can be applied. Okay, rule of 13 can be applied and say to say a particular peak is a fragmented piece species or something else. Okay, of course this rule of 13 can be applied to anything, and then to basically find out how many number of carbons are there, how many number of nitrogens, hydrogens are there. So this can be applied. Rule of 13 generally we discussed to find out the homologous series, right? Probably you might have studied homologous series. That is where it has come from. But then it is a good rule that help us to derive the molecular formulas. Okay, in the case of the fragmented species or the molecular ion species. What you do that if you see a peak at a particular position, that that number you just divide with the 13. Okay, divide with the 13, and then how many times that is dividing, that will basically will be the n. That n is nothing but the number of carbons, and the hydrogens are the ones actually the n plus r. R is the remainder. Okay, R is the remainder. N plus R actually will give the number of hydrogens, number of pairs of hydrogen that is required. Okay, so this is a rule of 13 that you can apply and to say a particular one is a fragmented one or molecular one. That is another thing. Then similarly, you can also use the hydrogen deficiency index. Hydrogen deficiency index, and that is another formula, can be applied to the fragmented ion or the molecular mass. Okay, to say a particular one is a molecular ion peak or not. Okay, in this case that the HDI, hydrogen deficiency index, how many hydrogens are deficient, okay, to form the molecular or how many hydrogens are required to form the saturated hydrocarbon. That is something that represented by the HDI. HDI is equal to n minus r plus 2 by 2. Okay, so you can use this rule where n is the number of carbon atoms, r is this one. Okay, so you can apply and then calculate this HDI. So based on the HDI, you can tell that if it is a whole number and if it is a fraction, so there is a difference. Okay, so if it is a whole number, basically I think we forgot this. Yeah, so if it is a whole number, then you can say then that particular ion can be odd electron ion. Okay, and there is a high possibility that ion will be a molecular ion. Okay, suppose if it is an even number, definitely that particular ion peak cannot be your molecular ion, because we know very well the molecular ion is an odd electron species. Okay, so HDI is the another parameter that really gives us the impression about the molecular ion. If HDI is definitely is a whole number, then you can immediately say it is a molecular ion, because our molecular ion will have odd number of electrons. If HDI is a even number, so it is unlikely that will be your molecular ion, and that is one thing. The higher resolution, lower resolution, we already discussed, but just to give you an example, you can see that suppose in the mass spectrum, you have seen a molecular mass of 98.0372. Okay, the low resolution mass spectrometer will give you only the 98, but it will not give these fractions. But this 98, close by 98, there can be several compounds. For example, C3H6N4. Okay, C4H4NO2. Okay, C4H6N2O. So these several possibilities are there for 98. But which one is exactly is your compound that you are expecting? That you don't have any idea. But if you record the spectrum using the high resolution mass spectrometer, the advantage is that they give exact value like this. Okay, 98.0. The up to 4 digits they give very precise the molecular weights. Therefore, it is easy to interpret. You can see here you are seeing a molecular mass of 98.0372. And suppose if this is the formula, this is the molecular weight. Okay, so these are calculated based on the exact atomic weights, and these molecular weights are calculated based on the exact atomic weights. And this I already explained what is exact atomic weights. Okay, except carbon, every atom the atomic weights are fractions, not this thing. But for a general convention, we represent the nearest numbers. Okay, so that is the exact atomic numbers. If you use it, then it is possible to calculate exact molecular mass. And then whatever the formula that you may think of, you can just start writing around it. But only one formula that will be very close to the one which you have really. This is 98.0372, which is very close to 98.0368. Okay, it is only the difference is 0.0004, 3 digits. Okay, 4 digits the difference. So this is the compound that the one what you have seen in the mass spectrum, what you have given is this compound. Okay, so this is the very beauty. This is the beauty of the high resolution mass spectrometry. Now here comes the interference or the isotope peaks discussion. As I told you that carbon, hydrogens, and all the elements will have certain component of certain amount of m+1. That means in the case of carbon, that the 99 atoms are with atomic weight of 12. Only one atom, remaining one atom will be atomic weight of 13. Okay, therefore, if you have a 6, for example, if you have 2 carbons, for example, in the case of ethane, just take an example of ethane. Ethane has 2 carbon atoms. Therefore, it's the m+1 peak intensity can be calculated. How? So the contribution actually comes from the number of carbon atoms. Okay, there are 2 carbon atoms are there. Therefore, 2 multiplied by how many the relative abundance of that particular isotope. So carbon 13, what is the relative abundance? It is 1.1, right? So that will contribute approximately 2.16 is the relative abundance of m+1 peak in the case of ethane. Now, we also know very well that the hydrogen also can present in deuterium format, right? So in the case of hydrogens, how much is the deuterium contribution? The deuterium is approximately 0.016 is the deuterium contribution. Therefore, I can calculate the deuterium contribution to the m+1 peak like this. There are 6 hydrogens are there, and 6 hydrogens can present in the deuterium format. So their relative abundance, each relative abundance is 0.016. So it is approximately 0.01 is the contribution. So hydrogen is giving this much contribution, and then previously we just calculated the carbon contribution to the m+1 peak is this much. So add together that this is the percentage of the m+1 peak. That means when you talk about the ethane, CH3, its molecular mass is 30, and then along with the 30, adjacent to 30, at 31, you will see a peak with the 2.2 percentage, a small peak, a tiny peak that you will observe. The tiny peak actually comes from the m+1, and to the m+1, mostly the hydrogens and also the carbons, mostly the carbons and hydrogens will contribute. You may say that this is very negligible. Yes, this is negligible when you're talking about small carbon atoms, a small number of carbon atoms, or the lower molecular weight compounds. Suppose you just imagine that you are talking about a bigger molecule where you have so many carbons and so many hydrogens are there. For example, a simple peptide. Okay, simple peptide, you just take it, so many protons, so many carbons are there. So naturally, that m+1 peak abundance intensity will be definitely higher, and sometimes even it will be even more also. Okay. Now coming to the next one, next isotope peak is the m+2. m+2 also that we can calculate in the similar fashion, but the problem is a carbon do not exist in the m+2 peak. Carbon do not exist in the 14 format. Maximum it will exist in the 13 format. One atom out of the 100 will be in the form of 13, but then there will not be 14. So therefore carbon will not contribute to the m+2. Then what else will contribute? Tritium. Tritium contribution is even negligible, very, very small. It is negligible. But there are certain other atoms that can contribute. For example, you can see here in this table, actually the relative abundance of the isotopes, it is given. So hydrogen deuterium is 0.016, and then 13 carbon, we just discussed these two. Nitrogen can contribute, oxygen can contribute this much, and silicon, yes, silicon is the another interesting element which contribute more, even more to the even larger than the carbon. That is, silicon can present 29. The percentage is 5 out of the 100 atoms. 5 atoms can present in 29 atomic weight, with 29 atomic weight. Okay, and then sulfur can exist almost 1.78 contribution. So these are the ones actually contribute to the m+1. Suppose in your compound, if these all elements are there, accordingly you can calculate the m+1 peak. And then you can see on the right to this m+2, the contribution to the m+2 peak mainly comes from oxygen. Oxygen can present in 18 format, and also silicon, that is approximately the 3.3%, and sulfur 4%, 4.4, and the chlorine and bromide. So these are the relative abundance. These are the elements generally contribute to the m+2 peaks. Okay, so please remember these things, and accordingly one can calculate all the percentage of m+1 and the percentage of m+2. And in the examination point of view, you will be asked, you will be given some kind of chemical formula of your molecule, and then you will be asked to calculate what is the percentage of the m+1 peak and then m+2 peak. So please remember this. So now, why I'm saying all these things is that the m+1 peak actually indicates, suppose if provided that if you doesn't have the other elements, only the carbon and the hydrogens are there, then in this case, then it is fairly easy to understand that in the case of ethane, you just remember that it's a relative abundance of the m+1 peak is 2.2. That means 2 atoms are there, and you see a 2 intensity, right? So this is a kind of indication that M+1 peak actually will give an indication or rough estimate to the number of carbon atoms present in a given molecule. That is the advantage of the M+1 peak, right? So the M+1 peak gives a rough estimate to the total number of carbon present in the molecule. Why? Because we know that each carbon is contributing approximately one, right? For example, you see a peak at 78, that is a molecular weight, and then molecular weight 78 is your molecular weight, and then M+1 there is a peak, and which is a 7%, approximately 7%. That means there is a high chance that it can have almost six carbon atoms. Why I'm saying 6 carbon? Because you can just divide that, the percentage what you see in the mass spectrum or the intensity of that M+1 peak with the 1 plus 1.1, then it will give you roughly 6 numbers. So this is the kind of rough estimate that you can always make out. Okay, and as I told you that suppose if a carbon is having some of the carbons, for example, you may have a very high peptide, a big peptide where you have 100 carbons are there, where you have 100 carbons are there. Okay, and then in that case, what is the abundance? The intensity of the M+1 is going to be even much higher than the molecular ion, right? It is going to be much higher than the molecular weight. Why? Because that you can multiply that into the relative abundance, and accordingly you will get it. Okay, so this principle can be extrapolated to other species as well, other M+2, M+3, M+4, and M+6 as well. Okay, and if you want more details about that, probably you can read this Silverstein textbook. You can find that. And this is a best example, really interesting to know. There is a molecule insulin. Insulin will have a 257 number of carbon atoms. Okay, and in this case, your molecular ion will be here, and then your insulin M+ ion peak will be much higher. Why? Because it has a huge number of the carbon atoms are there. So accordingly, they will contribute. In that case, it will be even higher. Okay. Right, and then another interesting thing that we should remember about the halides. Halides are very halides gives a good isotopic peaks, which are really diagnostic peaks to say a particular element is present or not. Okay, whenever you come across 1:3 ratio, the M+2 peak and then molecular ion peak, then you can always jump to a conclusion that there will be a chlorine. And then similarly, if you see almost equal intensity of M+ ion peak as well as the M+2 ion peak, then there is a high probability that the bromide will present. Why? Because of this reason. You can see here the relative abundance of 35 chlorine is actually 75%, and 75 out of the 100 chlorine atoms, 75 numbers will be with the 35 mass number, atomic mass number, whereas 25 number, approximately 25 number will be with the 37. Therefore, that means 1:3, right? So the ratio is 1:3. Therefore, M+2 peak will be seen 1:3 ratio. So whenever you see this signature, then you can immediately write, okay, there is a chlorine is present. Similarly, in the case of bromide, the bromine 79 is the molecular weight of bromine, and whose relative abundance is this much. Whereas the bromine can also present with a molecular atomic weight of 81, and its abundance is this much. That means almost half of the bromines will exist in the 79, half of the other remaining will exist in the 81 molecular atomic weight. Therefore, when you try to record the mass spectrum of a compound containing the bromine, then what you see is this, that you will see M peak and then M+2 almost equal intensity. that immediately gives you that gives you immediately, whenever you come across this type of feature, immediately you jump into conclusion that there is a bowel. That's how. There is no other alternative, because this has come from the relative abundance, and that is very much evident from the spectral data in most of the cases. Okay, there is no other thing. And apart from the halides, there are certain other elements, as I have discussed in the previous class. The sulfur and then silicon also can contribute to the M+2 peaks. Okay. Okay. So I think we have discussed a little longer. I'm not sure I have few more slides. Anyway, that I can take the next class. With this, I stop here my class, and then next class we will discuss further on this.